Hello, and welcome to Awkward Family Conversations, a intergenerational discussion of topics of interest, mainly to millennials and Zoomers, but potentially to anybody who's got nothing better to do. This is our final episode of our season one. 10 episodes, largely focused on workplace issues, with a few appearances by Addie's cat. Speaking of Addie, let me introduce you to my daughter, Addie. She lives a glamorous life. In fact, not too long ago, a few years ago, she spent some time on the French Riviera. So
And I did.
that's kind of the life that she leads.
What you're leaving out is that I spend most of my days covered in some form of animal excrement. So
That's the new Addie. The old Addie was very glamorous.
was she?
We went to the French Riviera. That's pretty good.
Between volleyball seasons.
Between volleyball seasons, exactly. Anyway, hello, Addie. How are you?
Hi, Dad. I'm here with my father, Rhett, who just introduced me very uncharacteristically. So I shall do the same for him and share with the world that his fantasy football team did indeed lose last week to mine.
Sadly, I needed Patrick Mahomes to keep it under 30, and he did not. So he paid off for you last week in a big way. It's true.
I realized today as I was writing down my Rhett trivia, I forgot to do anything with my fantasy football team this week also. So,
it seems to work for you, so why change?
yeah. Well, I mess with a good thing.
Why mess with a good thing? Yeah, I'll give you extra bonus trivia for Addie. For several years running, she won our NCAA tournament pool when she was in her pre-teens, I believe. Mainly just by asking me who was the higher seeded team and picking that one. So there was a couple of years.
Don't overthink it.
What's that?
Don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it. And you didn't, and you won. So very impressive. What is our topic today to round out our first season?
Our final episode is a little bit lighthearted, and it is, why is my boss such a jerk? And I must preface this with any of my coworkers watching, I cannot relate to this question.
Yes, the question that goes back to the beginning of time. As I recall, Adam had a bit of a beef with his boss, telling him what he could and couldn't do. So bosses and employees, tension, conflict, etc., go back a very long way and are not culturally specific either. Everybody complains about the boss. But before we dive into our 2 minutes of internet research that we allow for subjects, let me ask you, Addie, what do you look for in a boss? You know, we talk about why my boss is such a jerk, but what are you looking for in a boss?
Someone who will hire me.
Someone who will hire me. Once you're hired, though, what are you looking for from your boss?
I mean, respect, mutual respect. Like, I respect them as my boss, but I don't want to be treated like someone who's got to be there regardless. It's nice to have a boss who recognizes your contributions and your reason for being there and values your time. That's probably the biggest one. I haven't had too much experience with being choicey with bosses, so.
Yeah. So what I heard in there was you want respect. So you want to be treated like a person, not a worker who has no choice, no discretion in the matter. I heard I forgot what I heard in there. He said,
but I want to be hired.
I want to be hired. So you want somebody who recognizes your talent. And there was something else you said in there that I've totally spaced on.
I think I just went with respect.
Well, you went with respect. You said something else that I was going to make a point about. But obviously, being now in my 60s, as we talked about in previous episodes, mental capacity diminishes over time. And there's a great illustration of it happening. Either that or it's just absent-mindedness. But anyway, yes, the ideal boss is one who does recognize you as a person and who sees you as a person, somebody who has talents and obviously in the workplace you're looking to the boss is looking for you to produce something, but you don't want to feel just like another cog in a machine. The way I think of bosses, I want to know what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm looking for the boss to communicate goals. I want context. I want to understand why it is that we're doing this. What's the purpose? What's the why are we pursuing these goals? I like coaching in the sense that, if I need some help understanding, or I'm stuck someplace and need some guidance, I look for that from my boss, and then I look for feedback. How am I doing? So, I mean, all of this in a workplace setting, a boss is not a friend. A boss is not a partner. A boss is, there's a professional relationship there, but that doesn't, but there's two pieces of that: professional, meaning it's in the workplace, and relationship, meaning it's between people. And I think a lot of the things that create situations where you think you've got a jerk for a boss come about because obviously there's things lacking. So let's talk about past bosses, because obviously your current bosses are not a problem. But what's annoyed you in the past about bosses that you've had?
Annoyed me.
Yeah, why?
Lack of communication.
Yeah, what's the jerk behavior that you've experienced in your life?
The lack of communication has been a thing, thinking back on it, and I didn't talk about this in our unreleased pilot. Um, but one of the things has been working in retail jobs with like week to week schedules, and bosses who say that the schedule we posted on Wednesday and then posted on like Saturday is annoying, because it's kind of like, that's, I need to know what my next week's going to be like. I can't just wait for you guys to rule my life kind of moments. Or working in audio sometimes too, just generalized disrespect, like
Mm.
yelling and anger issues.
All right, so professional demeanor and behavior. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Boundaries.
Boundaries. Okay, little TMI.
Yeah, the DMI, but also just kind of like, maybe that's something you go talk about with your therapist, not me.
I see. Yeah, yeah. So oversharing or inappropriate. Again, not professional, because again, remember, the boss-employee relationship is a professional relationship. Professional meaning workplace. It should be focused only on things that are relevant to, what is, part of the job, and then the relationship
Speaking
again
of,
is between two people. What did you say?
speaking of audio, the audio intern
The
has
audio
a
intern has made her appearance, huh? There she
she's
is.
been asleep in her little cat cave for the past 2 hours, and this is the moment she's decided to come out.
Well, she needs to contribute, apparently. At least she feels the need, which is what you want in an intern, an ambition.
She's very intentional.
Very good. Well, I did do 2 minutes of internet research to kind of research, just to try to figure out, is this a thing? It's clearly a thing. A lot of people have issues with bosses. A couple of guys, Jim Hessler and Steve Montenko, are leadership coaches and host of the Boss Show, which is a podcast for anybody who is or has a boss, which pretty much covers the world, at least the working world.
Not cats.
I'll check them out if you want. The most common complaints that employees have about their bosses. This was from Inc. magazine. This was an article about them in Inc. magazine. They first issue is micromanagement. My boss micromanages me. A lot of these have to do with communication, as you were talking about. My boss doesn't listen. My boss doesn't want to have his or her opinions and ideas challenged. So, sort of the know-it-all boss. My boss doesn't follow through on promises. And this is part of the trust piece in relationships, right? If you're in a relationship and you say you're going to do something, you do it. My boss assigns deadlines without considering what's on my plate, something that you talked about, or just, assigning shifts or whatever. And this gets to that kind of human element, not treating me as a person who's deserving of respect, and doesn't have time for me. My boss doesn't have time for me. So in my case, when I talked about what I was looking for in a boss, they're not time to communicate, time to provide coaching, time to provide feedback, that sort of thing. My boss doesn't give me helpful feedback about my performance, which is one of the important key roles, I think, of any boss, is to work with employees and let them know how they're doing. And then finally, my boss is disorganized and reactive. So I think a lot of us look for our bosses, again, to sort of set the agenda, who give us goals, give us the context for the goals, some direction in how we're going to get there, and then, turn us loose and let us do our work. But anyway, that's a pretty comprehensive list of a lot of failings of bosses. There was a poll of about 1,000 workers by Harrison Interact, which is a polling company. a communications consultancy is how they describe themselves, but they do a lot of professional work or a lot of polling type work and data creation in the for surveys and the like. But 91% of employees say communication issues can hurt their relationship with their boss. And again, as we were talking about, the one of the key things that you want from a boss, almost all of the key things you want from a boss are communication is at the heart of that. I mean, a boss's role is really to communicate the purpose and the goals, the mission, everything of the organization, and then the specific piece of the work that your team needs to do. And that's communication, and then it needs to communicate up. Things that we learn need to be communicated up through the management structure, and that's what the boss exists for. So communication is a central skill and a central responsibility of the of any boss. And so they also had nine pieces, 9 things here that U.S. workers described. So in ascending order, or rather descending order. No, it's ascending order. Starting at the least impactful, 23% of workers found that their bosses not asking about employees' lives outside of work was a problem. So about a quarter of workers wanted the bosses to care more about them as a person. About a third of U.S. workers found their bosses refusing to talk to people on the phone or in person. So it's kind of hard to give feedback and kind of hard to provide direction just using emails or written notes or carrier pigeon or however you're not doing it, either by the phone or in person. Not knowing employees' names, 36%. That's more than a third of bosses, according to U.S. workers, didn't know their employees' names. And as somebody who struggles with names, I can appreciate that sometimes that's a challenge, but it's one that you need to make a priority for. 39% of workers said their boss does not offer constructive criticism. So not getting the feedback that allows employees to make adjustments to do their jobs better. Almost half faulted their bosses for taking credit for other ideas. That's fairly common. Obviously, about half the employees see this as an issue. Another half say that bosses refusing to talk to subordinates is a problem. So half of the workers are saying they've got bosses who, some degree or another, don't communicate with them. That's a big problem when communication is at the heart of the role. Not having time to meet with employees, another half, basically said that. That's probably the same half that's refusing to talk to them. But still, half of bosses not meeting with employees, that's a bad sign. Not giving clear directions, 57%. So almost 6 out of 10 bosses aren't clear in laying out objectives and explaining what they're trying to do. And then finally, the number one beef that bosses had were not recognizing employee achievements. And so recognition is one of the things I didn't talk about. But for me, that falls under feedback. You want feedback, and you want constructive criticism, and obviously 40% of people aren't getting constructive criticism, but you also want recognition when something goes right. You want your boss to come to you and say, hey, you did a nice job there. That's exactly what I want you to do, or that exceeded my expectations in terms of what you wanted to do. And almost 2/3 of people are not getting recognized for work that they think is, that they should be. So those are all a bunch of communication challenges. So when you talk about your boss being a jerk, this is kind of the behaviors that manifest itself. Not respecting people, not communicating. A lot of these pieces are about communicating, not giving feedback, not being clear, not respecting people at a very basic human level. So that's all. That's a lot of stuff going on there. Did we miss anything? Does that feel like that covers the gamut?
About covers it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that bosses are falling down on the job. That they're not helping their employees and the employees and their team members, do what they can. Well, it turns out I did the last piece of our 2 minutes of internet research. Turns out that being a jerk sometimes makes a boss's well-being better. And so it's probably not a surprise that bosses are under a tremendous amount of stress. And managing stress takes energy. which means that it takes away from anything else that they want to do. Also, that takes energy is restraining yourself. Restraint takes energy, and that's pretty well known and pretty well accepted. I think that think about yourself when you're tired, i.e., lack energy. You're much more likely to lash out in maybe inappropriate ways, maybe say things that you don't mean because you just don't have the energy to provide the filter that you want. And we talked earlier about a professional relationship, right? It's in the workplace. And so there are certain levels of respect and behavior that's appropriate. And, yelling and screaming in the workplace, probably not appropriate. Calling people names, demeaning other people, probably not appropriate. But it does take energy to keep yourself from doing that when you're tired. And so in the short term, it actually helps a boss who's under stress if they snap and carry on, scream, yell. But so it actually makes the boss feel better. So in some respects, there's a payoff for the boss for actually behaving badly. They're able to gain more energy and be able to conserve some of that energy. And so that actually is a benefit to bosses. Now, the good news about this is that benefit is fairly short-lived. It only lasts about a week before people who respond to, you respond. If your boss yells at you, you're going to respond to that. But if your boss constantly yells at you, you're going to respond to that too, probably by leaving or managing, responding to that behavior in a way, sometimes passive aggressively, sometimes aggressively, in a lot of different ways. And those benefits to that have accrued to the boss tend to go, for being kind of a jerk, being boorish, kind of go away after about a week. The team starts to react, and then that increases the boss's stress because they're engaging in counterproductive, aggressive behaviors. They're leaving the team. They're calling it sick. So while there is short-term benefit for behaving like a jerk sometimes, there's no real long-term benefit, and that's probably good. So.
And your employees disengage.
And as we've seen in an earlier episode, yes, only about a third of American workers are engaged in their work. Most of workers are ambivalent, and then there is a 15%-ish who are actively disengaged, so they're undermining their work. And so, yeah, you're not going to get engagement if you're a crappy boss who's yelling and screaming at employees, not communicating, not giving feedback, not setting clear direction, not respecting employees, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what the contours of this boss question look like. But we were looking more for why. What's the deal? Why does my boss behave that way? Because we don't understand what the boss is doing. So we're going to walk a little bit of time in the boss's shoes. And so, before we do that, though, let's talk about what you have liked about bosses that you've had. When you think about the bosses that you feel have done a good job with you, what are some of the things that they did that made you feel that way?
Well, thinking about my current boss, actually, and looking at this list of things that bug people about their current managers, my boss actually does the opposite, a lot of these things, and both my immediate supervisor and then the manager of the overall hospital are actually really good about me specifically. I can't really speak for other people, but I've seen them do it with some other people about being very
and you're not
I
even
want to
60.
say admirative, but I don't think that's a word. They're really appreciative of achievements I've made, and they tell me I'm doing well, and that's always very nice to hear that I'm on the right track. And there's a lot of we had a meeting recently, and one employee brought up an idea for a system, and my immediate supervisor started laughing, and then the big manager was like, she's actually suggested this multiple times. I just haven't made it happen yet. So we were all kind of laughing as oh, but she's also letting that supervisor know it was her idea originally. So it's really the communication and the just feeling of general respect, and being not just feeling if I quit today, they could have another me in tomorrow. It's kind of oh, I'm valuable to the team.
Have they given you any constructive feedback? I mean, have you been corrected in any way?
I mean, gently, never like
No,
you're
but you
bad.
corrected, right? No, I mean, corrected. You were doing something not the way they wanted you to do it, and they showed you how to do it.
Mhm.
Like what?
There was a time I was talking about potential allergy solutions with a client because they were coming in for scratching, and I mentioned a injection that we can do. And after I hung up, my boss was like, "It's kind of best to wait for the doctor on that one because that's kind of like our last resort allergy solution, and we don't want someone coming in and being like, 'No, I want to do that right now.'" And I was like, "Gotcha."
Okay,
So,
yeah. So, but they again, they're making those corrections in the moment. So right after you hang up, right after you
mhm.
talked about that, they're right there with some corrective or constructive criticism to say, hey, this is what.
And she admit herself in my yearly performance review because I came in and mentioned that I was nervous, and she told me and was like, "If you come in and I start criticizing you today out of the blue, that's bad management. That's not being a bad employee." And I was like, "I like you. I
Yeah, no,
like
that's
working
right.
here."
No, that's exactly right. You should, the best bosses are giving constant feedback. As I
Mhm,
mentioned, there's kind of four things that I look for in a boss. I want somebody to tell me what we're striving for. What are our goals? Why are we striving for those things? Help me with any kind of coaching or any knowledge gap or skill gap that I have. Help me develop that, fill that gap, and then give me feedback. How am I doing? And the best bosses are doing all of those things all of the time. It really is. I mean, the employee review should just be a formality, and a lot of companies have them to encourage, to make sure that those things are happening. But the best bosses don't need that kind of structure because they're constantly giving that feedback, constantly communicating about the organization, and then also communicating upwards, to their bosses. Um, and so that's probably the first thing to remember. Why is your boss behaving like a jerk? Probably the first thing to recognize is your boss is also an employee. Very few bosses are the final word. Even the CEOs of companies have to answer the board of directors, and so um, bosses have at least two roles, right? They're your boss, they're your manager, and so they're acting in that capacity. But they're also employees. They also have a relationship with their own boss, and if all of the things that were true of your boss as a boss are probably true of their boss as a boss too. So, while they're dealing with employees as a boss, they're dealing as an employee with their boss. And so, um, it's not that your boss has only got that role to play in any kind of organization. And so, if your boss is being a jerk, a lot of it is probably because they're overtaxed. They don't have either the resources to do their job right, or they're not managing those resources correctly. And some of that is because they're being your boss is not the only thing that they have to do. And I think nobody wants. Well, I won't say nobody. Almost nobody wants to be a jerk. People want to do good things, and they want to be good people, and they want to do their roles well. Um, Sometimes it's a lack of training. Sometimes people don't recognize, okay, this is my role, or they think they're executing their role, but they're not getting all of it because they're not especially good at communication. Maybe they don't like to interact with people. If that's true, then they haven't done a very good job in their career. If they're in a management role and don't really like to interact with people, then being a boss is probably not a good role for them, because that is the essence of being a boss, is interacting with your team. And nobody really sets out to be a bad boss, but they become bad bosses for a variety of reasons, or they are bad bosses that behave in ways that are counterproductive because they've got a lot on their plate, and a lot of stress. And part of that stress is because they're an employee dealing with a boss who may also be not very good, not giving them all that feedback, not communicating well. So that's kind of the first thing to remember: is your boss is not just a boss. The other thing to remember is that there's this energy imbalance really between you and your boss. You and your boss have a relationship. It's a one-on-one relationship. Um, but your boss, while that's your only relationship is with your boss likely has several relationships like yours with other employees. And so where you can devote 100% of your boss employee relationship, you can devote 100% of that to that relationship. Your boss cannot. Your boss has got to devote part of his or her energy to your relationship, but also energy to a bunch of other relationships that are similar. So with all of your coworkers, they've got a relationship with your boss, and your boss has to have the energy to manage all those relationships, not just a single one. So there's this imbalance where this relationship is really important to you as an employee. You have just that you're the only two people in this thing, but for the boss's perspective, the boss has got a lot, or potentially a lot of other people that they're managing. And even if it's just one other person, now the boss has got 50% of energy on each of the relationships, but coming back is 100% of energy in each of the relationships. And that's, so you do have this imbalance. And so it often feels like you're putting more into a relationship than the boss is. And that disparity can feel, well, anytime you're in a relationship of any kind, you want there to be balance and you want it to be equal, more or less. And this boss-employee relationship, it's tough to get that way because, again, your boss has got many relationships and you've just got the one. So there's that imbalance that creates at least a perception of inequity. But that's the reason is the boss has got to has to manage a lot of people, not just you, while you're managing your own boss. And by the way, that boss is also managing up in that same kind of situation to a manager who also has other people reporting to him or her. And so they're experiencing kind of both sides of this thing. And what do you bet that a lot of their attention is going to their relationship with their boss because they're feeling a little bit ignored, not heard, not communicated with, in part because that boss of theirs is, having that same relationship with that, with your boss's peers. And so there's a lot of tugs and a lot of pieces that are coming into play here that are limiting the boss's ability and energy levels to give back sort of equivalent levels of support, attention, communication, et cetera, which is what we're all looking for. So the boss is in a bit of a is stretched a little bit. And then finally, I think one of the things that we have to realize is that there are few bosses, and especially of entry-level workers or workers who are relatively young in their career. It's rare to have a boss who is only a boss. In other words, they're only managing a team. Often bosses, especially bosses managing teams of younger workers, are also have production responsibilities, meaning they have to generate work themselves, not just from their team, but from themselves. And so now you've got, and this will be, by the way, your first experience with management. If and when you get to the point where you're going to manage a team or manage people, it's unlikely that will be the only thing that you do. You will manage people as a part of your responsibilities, but part of your responsibilities will also be about producing work, production type responsibilities. So your boss has got to-dos unrelated to managing you and your coworkers that boss is trying to execute on as well. And depending how well they are negotiating their workload with their boss, and it depends what the organization needs. Typically, there's more work to do than there are workers to do it. And then you're going to layer on management responsibilities, especially younger managers or managers of younger teams typically are younger, less experienced as well. And so they're not very good at managing. They haven't really, it's their first time doing it. It becomes a challenge that way. Like managing is like any other skill. Once the more you do it, the better you get at it. But especially for people young in their career, you're going to run into a lot of these bad behaviors because of inexperience. And you're going to run into it because of these imbalances, the focus of your boss on relationships with his or her boss. But you're also going to run into it because they just don't have the time to practice these skills or to devote enough time that would allow them to meet the energy that you're investing in that relationship, because they have other things, other responsibilities, other duties that they're trying to execute as well. So, splitting time between managing managing other people and then also delivering on work objectives is one of those really tough things. And again, if you get into a situation, your first and second, even third, jobs as a manager will probably involve you doing some work outside of that management, and that becomes that's another drain on the energy that the boss has to do the good work around what it is that we think what we're looking for out of bosses. So while there's no real excuse for behaviors, disrespecting people, not communicating well, kind of pulling up in your office and not interacting with anybody, there are certainly explanations for why this is so prevalent. And I think it's largely about energy management, focus, attention. It's also about being intentional, because we have to work that in. If you're a boss, you need to set aside time to talk to your employees, if that's what it takes. I mean, if you're not a natural at going out and checking on employees and interacting in the moment, then you better block time. Funny story, I worked with a guy who was he was a terrific boss, and I really liked him, but he was not Mr. He wasn't super comfortable socially in a work setting. He's a terrific guy. I still see him, actually. He's wonderful. But he would schedule time on Monday mornings to walk around and talk to his employees about the weekend, and it would be blocked off in his calendar so that he would take 20 minutes and walk around. Now, it was a little stilted because he tended to ask the same questions. In football season, it was always like, "Hey, did you watch the Niners yesterday?" kind of thing. Baseball season, it was about the Giants, but it was, I mean, he put the mechanism in place that would allow that I won't say forced him, but gave him space to be able to do something that he knew was important as a boss, which was to go out and show some interest in your employees and just check in after the weekend and see how they're doing. And there's lots of tools. I mean, you don't have to be a natural people person to be a boss, because you can use these tools to help you do the things you need to do. And this is about that, being intentional. Even if you're not especially gifted at something, if you're intentional and you make it happen, you could, that's 80% of it. Just showing up is 80%. Show up, be present, make an effort. It may not be great, but at least you're trying, and people will give you credit for that. Obviously they prefer somebody who is a little more natural in those interactions, but the fact that he was willing to make that effort, I really appreciated it. It was quite cute to sort of see him out there doing his thing. But you know what? He knew it was important, and he made it happen. And that to me was a sign of a guy who was pretty committed to being a good boss. He was investing the time, using the tools, and even though he wasn't comfortable, he was making himself do it. And in the end, you're going to follow somebody like that, or at least I will, because they're working hard, and you can see it. And anyway, that was really kind of fun. Have you had when bosses check in with you? I mean, have you had any sort of funny stories about bosses trying to do the right thing, but maybe not completely smoothly?
I mean, yeah, when I was at Starstruck and Sean adopted me and was just always a little bit awkward.
Yeah, like what? Was there any example that comes to mind?
Not a specific moment, but certainly times where I was just like, I'm another intern. And then he would say something during that. He'd be like, we're friends. And I'd be like, what?
Well, again, this is what, people want emotional connections with other people. At work, it gets a little squirrely because it's a professional environment, and it's not, that's not necessary for you to do good work. But a lot of people want to feel valued and respected, and they feel like friendship is one of those things that is an indication that I'm valued. And I think you can, there's room for not being friends per se, but being colleagues and respectful colleagues who enjoy doing work together because you're good at it. And but that doesn't mean that you have to hang out and go for beers after work, although that can be fun too. I mean, you can have friends at work, and most people do, but it's not necessary to have a productive, positive relationship with your boss. You don't have to be a friend. I have been friends with many of my bosses, and I have not been friends with many of my bosses as well in my career. And I wouldn't say that there's a correlation between positive work experiences and whether I was a friend or not a friend. So let's talk, we talked about, kind of that boss, being a boss. And this is something that, all of you people who are asking about bosses should bear in mind, is that, communication is at the heart of being a boss. You're a conduit. As a boss, you're a conduit. You're a conduit of goals and objectives. You're a conduit of context and driving understanding. You're you're providing feedback and coaching, and then you're also a conduit the other way. You're taking information that's learned from your team, the results of the work that's been developed, and bringing that back up to your boss and saying, okay, this is what my team's accomplished. This is what we're doing, and that communication is really key. And I think there's if for employees, and like anybody, if you have clarity about what you're doing and why, you don't have to wonder about it. You don't have to devote time and energy to thinking about it, and you can focus much better on what it is that we have to accomplish. And that's the goal of any boss, is to get a team that's productive. And
If you have clarity.
Yes, indeed. And there she is.
I saw the opportunity and I took it.
And you took it. Well, you always like a good pun, so very good. Well, the good news is that's pretty much all I have to say about bosses. Do you have anything to add to our conversation?
I have nothing to add.
Are you going to be a boss one day?
God, I hope not.
Why?
It's actually funny because I think about this often in terms of what to do with my career, because just being a tech is not really where people end up. In the
Right.
typical, if you just go with being a tech and you're not trying to become a doctor, you typically work your way up through hospital management, like tech supervisor and then a hospital manager, et cetera, et cetera. And I watch the amount of hours that the tech supervisor spends at work and working off the clock. And I'm like, no,
Well,
I don't want to.
I mean, well, yes, I mean, you're taking a very specific role and expanding on it from there, but I would guess that there's many more opportunities. And I will say that as you become a boss and you become responsible for other people's work, which is essentially what being a boss is, right? You're a team leader. It does take more time, and the rewards are greater. You're going to get more salary. I mean, as we talked about before, if you've got skills that are in demand, and there's less of a supply of competent people to do that, which is true. And as you gain experience and expertise, you'll find that there are fewer and fewer people that have that expertise as you gain it, and so you become more valuable. And so you're not always going to be paid by the hour. At some point, it just makes sense to just pay you for the job. And yes, typically salaried positions require longer hours than 40 hours a week. I used to tell my people, expect to work 40 to 45 hours a week, most weeks. There'll probably be 2 or 3 times a year for a week or two where we have to go more than that. We have to be in the 50, 60, 70 hours because we're trying to get something done. And that's and putting man hours or person hours against it is the only way to get it done. And so that's just part of the deal. But you get paid well. Benefits are certainly part of the deal, and there's a satisfaction too. And I think this is not well understood by young people, just because it's a tough thing to conceive of. But that solving complex challenges and figuring out a way to you've got a problem that has to be solved, an issue that needs to be resolved, and figuring out how to do that can be extremely satisfying. Especially if the outcome is in doubt, is not preordained, and you drive the outcome, you make it a success. There's a tremendous amount of reward in that, emotional reward in doing something like that, and that is really, really powerful, making a difference. And we talked about this, I think, last week, that a lot of people want to make a difference in the world. And working is one way you can do that.
That would be the context in which I would be okay to be a boss, would be if it was something that I really believed in.
Right.
But
right.
At this moment in time, I don't know what that is, because I'm 22 and broke.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Now, yes. And that's, and 22, you're not going to get a chance to change the world a whole lot just because you lack experience and expertise. 10,000 hours later, though, you'll be much farther along. 5 years from now, you will have developed a bunch of skills. And if you're intentional about developing those skills, they will be, you'll have created a portfolio of abilities that are in demand. And then you'll be able to do work that is a lot more meaningful and is more challenging, requires you to really think about things, execute tasks in ways that will create good outcomes. And that's the reward for work. Picking up a paycheck is really be a little bit I'm not sure what the right word is, but I'll just say, getting a paycheck is not hard. You can find a job typically with effort. It's finding the job that you like to do, finding a job that you're well suited for, finding a job that will give you the emotional rewards and that sense of accomplishment. That's the challenge, and that's where people are not engaged with their work. That's why we have only a third of our colleagues, of the people out here in the U.S. who are working, feel like, boy, I can't wait to get to work because I like what I do, and it matters to me, and I feel like I'm making a difference. And so, 2/3 of the people out there, of U.S. workers, are, at best, just putting in, just going through the motions to get their paycheck. And that's what's that?
That's why I will always encourage people to trust their veterinarian, because I can guarantee you nobody is in animal care for the paycheck.
Yeah, well, no, there are people, but
I mean, I could get my paycheck doing something a lot less emotionally and physically difficult,
yeah,
but I very much care about what I do, as does everyone else at my practice, is there for the love of helping animals.
yep, absolutely, that's right. And you want to continue to do that even as you master certain skills and certain experiences and roles. You want to continue to strive to grow. And it'll be amazing as you look back on your career 40 years from now or 50 years from now and say, wow, that was kind of an interesting path that I chose. And have no idea where it's going to take you exactly, but to the extent that you can, like I say, intentionally build skills and experiences, then you'll I think it'll end up taking you much. The odds are much higher that it'll end up taking you in a way that's going to give you those kind of rewards. So don't close the door on being a boss. And as you when you do become a boss, come back to this podcast and listen to it and find out all the things that. What's that?
Said if the internet still exists.
Oh, it'll still exist. It may morph into something else, but this will still be there. So. Come back and listen to this and see what you need to do to be a good boss, because these things are, like I say, the boss employee thing has gone on since the beginning of time, and it's probably not going to change a whole lot going forward. People are going to want bosses, and bosses are probably not going to have their entire bandwidth to devote to being a boss. And so I think we'll always kind of have these issues. So take these experiences, the experiences that you're having right now with good bosses, and make sure that you're one of those people who are doing those things. And if you can't do it naturally, then do what my old boss did, which was use the tools, scheduling tools, etc., to do them unnaturally. So, but do them, whatever you do it, make sure you're doing it. So I think that's what we have today, Eddie. Our final podcast of the season, mostly again focused on workplace. I don't think we have any follow-up items to research. And we both behaved ourselves vocabularily speaking, so there's no Venmo that has to happen here. So why don't you close us out?
All right. Well, you can find us on awkwardfamilyconversations.com, on Twitter at awkwardfamilys1, on YouTube and Facebook also at Awkward Family Conversations, and on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, or whatever you get your favorite podcasts at Awkward Family Conversations. Subtitle: be intentional. Let us know what you think. Keep questions, suggestions coming, especially now as we head into this nebulous time period between seasons where we have to come up with other topics and questions to tackle next season. So if you have maybe not a specific question, but a generalized topic you want us to explore, feel free to let us know that too. That's all we have for season 1.
That sounds good. All right, Eddie. Talk to you soon. I love you.
I love you too, Dad.
Bye.